I am going to start with the moment that made me feel physically sick, and then I will go back and tell you how I walked myself right into it. I was sitting in the campus library, in the far corner by the big window that faces the sea. It was a gray afternoon in late October, the kind of day where the sky and the water are the same tired color and the wind keeps slapping leaves against the glass. Students moved quietly in the background, carrying coffee and laptops and the illusion that their lives were still simple. On the table in front of me was a printed manuscript. 320 pages. A draft novel. My name was not on the cover. But it might as well have been. The title was a working one, something overly poetic that made me roll my eyes on reflex. The author name at the bottom was the one I knew far too well. Thomas Hale. Award-winning novelist. Head of the literature department at Shoreline University. My former boss. My former lover. The man I had almost dismantled my life for. He had sent the manuscript to the department as an early peek, a chance for us to bask in his genius, his words, his carefully curated vulnerability. I was the only one who had not commented in the group email chain. He noticed, of course. He always did. So I printed it. Told myself I would read, offer notes, act like everything between us was neatly buried. By page 40, my hands were shaking. By page 70, I knew I had been a fool. The story was about a summer residency for writers in an old house by the sea. It was about a younger woman, bright and overlooked, trapped in a distant relationship, craving someone to look at her like she was still possible. It was about an older man, charismatic and wounded, who prided himself on recognizing talent and quietly feeding off it. It was about an affair between them. He had changed the names. He had rearranged the order of things. But it was us. It was the house. It was that summer. My summer. My marriage. My guilt. My body knew it before my brain caught up. My heart hammered. My mouth went dry. My vision tunneled as I read scene after scene that I recognized down to the curve of a staircase, the color of a mug, the exact way the ocean sounded from the second floor landing at 3 a.m. He had not just written about me. He had been writing me while he lived me. And the worst part, the part that made me close my eyes and press my palm hard against my stomach, was this. Noah had read it first. My husband. The man I had cheated on. He had emailed me a link that morning and said he thought I should see it before it went wide. He had kept his tone polite. Almost neutral. Inside that neutrality was something so much worse than rage. That is where I will start. But to make any of it make sense, I need to pull you back with me to the beginning, to the first day I drove up the gravel road to the residency house and told myself I was only there to work. My name is Lily Hart. I am 32 years old, and the life I almost threw away for a man with a notebook began to crack long before his hands ever touched me. I teach creative writing at Shoreline, a small university perched on the cliffs of a New England coastal town. It is the kind of place people romanticize in brochures. Brick buildings with ivy creeping up the sides, a quad where students read in hammocks, a cafe that sells overpriced scones to visiting parents. It looks picturesque. It is also underfunded, overworked, and held together by adjuncts like me who string together classes and side gigs like beads on a fraying thread. At home, or what passed for home, there was Noah. Noah and I met in graduate school, back when we still believed in the clean arc of a narrative. He was a physics PhD then, all messy hair and chalk dust and grand theories about the universe. I loved the way his mind worked, the way his hands moved when he explained concepts, the way he listened to my rambling about novels like they were equations he could solve. We married at 27 in a small ceremony by a lake, the kind with mason jar centerpieces and Pinterest lighting. People said we were well matched. Left brain, right brain, but two halves of the same book. 3 years later, he got a research offer he could not refuse in another city, 4 hours away. We told ourselves it would be temporary. That we were strong enough to handle the distance. That the late-night calls and weekend drives would be cute, even. They were, at first. Then they were less so. The first year, he came home almost every weekend. The second, every other. By the third, sometimes 3 weeks would pass between visits and I would find myself standing in the kitchen, holding my phone, wondering if it was worth asking whether he was coming or if I should just assume not. He worked insane hours. I knew that. I taught overloaded semesters, mentored students, ran workshops. Our exhaustion matched, but not our priorities. He spoke about the experiment like it was a fragile organism that needed constant tending. I spoke about my classes like something I was borrowing until my real life began. We did not talk much about the emptiness that had crept into the space between us. We did not talk much, period. When the university announced the summer residency program, it felt like something solid I could hold on to. The plan was to host 10 writers in an old estate house the university had been gifted by some wealthy alum. 2 months of workshops, guest lectures, quiet hours, shared meals. The house sat on a hill overlooking the ocean, its porch wrapped around the front like an embrace, its windows tall and watchful. It had peeling white paint and a history of faculty parties that nobody talked about in front of students. The department needed someone to manage it. Thomas suggested me. "You need something that is yours," he told me in a meeting, one elbow draped over the back of the chair, his gaze steady. "You spend all year shepherding other people's work. It is time you ran something with your name attached." He was right. He was also misreading my hunger. Or maybe he was reading it exactly. Thomas Hale was the department's resident star. He had published 4 novels, one of which had been turned into a film that people streamed on airplanes. He had a reputation for being brilliant, exacting, and occasionally cruel. Students adored him and feared him in equal measure. He wore that power like a well-fitted coat. I respected his work. I had also spent an embarrassing amount of time wondering what it would be like to have that level of attention turned all the way on me. He picked me for the residency. He called it an opportunity. I called Noah the night I got the email. Noah congratulated me. His voice crackled through the speaker, tired but genuinely pleased. He said this was good for my career, that I deserved recognition, that he would try to visit at least once. I could hear typing in the background as he spoke. I asked if we could talk later, maybe really talk for once. He said the timing was bad, that he was on call for the lab, that he loved me, that he would make more time after this phase. After. Love deferred like a grant application. When I drove up to the house in June, the sky was impossibly blue. The kind of day that feels deliberately cinematic. The residency house loomed ahead, 3 stories of old wood and history. Someone had already strung fairy lights along the porch railings. The grass needed cutting. The ocean spread out behind it, glittering. Inside, the air smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. There was a long dining table, a big stone fireplace, mismatched chairs that would look charming in photos and be terrible for backs. Upstairs, there were 8 small bedrooms for residents and 2 slightly larger ones for faculty. Mine was at the end of the hall, with a view of the water and a bed that creaked when I sat down. I unpacked slowly. A stack of workshop plans on the desk. A photo of Noah and me on the nightstand, both of us laughing into the camera, our cheeks flushed with wine and future. I looked at our faces and felt an ache I did not know what to do with. On the second day, the residents arrived. They came in waves, dragging suitcases, clutching notebooks and fears. A woman in her 50s who had left a corporate job to finally write the novel she had carried like a secret pregnancy for years. A 21-year-old poet with shaved hair and a nose ring who spoke in metaphors even when asking where the bathroom was. A man my age with a wedding ring that he twisted when he talked about time away from his kids. And then there was Eva. 23, all sharp edges and big eyes, a scarf tied in her hair no matter the heat. She had the kind of restless energy that made chairs seem too small for her. She had read everything. She had opinions about all of it. She had been accepted into the residency on scholarship, her application letter a fierce declaration that she would not waste the chance. She looked at me like I was someone to impress. She looked at Thomas like he was gravity. He arrived last. Of course he did. Late afternoon, the sun slanting low, car door slamming as he stepped out wearing a linen shirt and the air of a man who knew he had been awaited. People shifted toward him without meaning to. He greeted the residents individually, saying their names with that particular warmth that makes you feel chosen. He hugged me. It was professional, quick, but I felt his hand press into the small of my back in a way that sent a quick uninvited spark through me. You did well with this group, he said quietly as he pulled away. You can feel the hum already. I smiled, trying not to lean into the praise like a plant toward light. The first week was busy in an honest way. Morning workshops. Afternoon writing hours. Evening readings by the fire. I was exhausted and satisfied at the end of each day. Eva brought in pages that were uneven and brilliant, half of them too raw, half of them already more alive than most of what crossed my desk in the regular semester. She stayed after one workshop while the others trailed out, clutching her pages like a casualty. She asked if she could talk through a scene with me. I said of course. She told me that she had never had a teacher take her seriously as an artist before. Her eyes were shiny when she said it. I remembered what that felt like, the first time someone older had looked at my work and not laughed it off. We talked for an hour. When she left, I felt both full and drained. I found Thomas on the porch later, leaning against a post, smoking a cigarette he would pretend was his first in months. He asked how it was going. I told him Eva was going to be dangerous. He smiled. The good kind or the bad, he asked. Both, I said. He laughed. We fell into a rhythm. Morning lectures alternated between us. Afternoons, he took small groups through close readings while I worked with others on structure and voice. Evenings, we co-hosted readings. The residents watched us like a televised drama. They were hungry for any sign of what good writing lives looked like. They saw 2 faculty members dedicated to the work. They did not see the way my heart sped up when Thomas's hand brushed mine passing a plate. They did not see the way his gaze lingered when we argued over a line in a poem. They did not see the nights when everyone went to bed and we stayed up, sitting at the big table with open notebooks and half-finished bottles of wine, talking about the one thing that had always been easier for me than relationships. Words. The first time Noah came was in the 3rd week. He arrived late on a Friday night, headlights sweeping across the lawn. The house was quiet. Residents were tucked away in their rooms, the sound of typing and pages turning behind closed doors. I met him on the porch. He looked older than he did in the framed photo. More tired. Still handsome, still him, but dimmed around the edges. He hugged me, kissed my temple, told me I looked good in that way that sounds surprised. We sat on the porch swing, talking about logistical things. His project. My schedule. The leaky faucet in our bathroom at home. We did not talk about how it felt to be together again. We did not talk about the months of silence. We did not talk about the fact that when he put his hand on my knee, it felt less like desire and more like an old habit. He stayed the weekend. We went for a walk along the cliff path. Ate with the residents. Slept in my narrow bed that protested underneath us. Sex was brief and careful and made me feel lonelier afterward than I had before. On Sunday afternoon, he stood in the doorway with his bag on his shoulder, apologizing about needing to get back to the lab. He told me he was proud of me. He told me the residency seemed important. He told me we would have more time together when his current experiment wrapped. He did not tell me he missed me. I did not ask. After he left, I stood alone in my room feeling like I had just watched myself play a version of my life for an audience that had already left. There was a knock on my door. Thomas stood there, leaning against the frame, 2 mugs in his hands. He said he had made too much coffee and would I help him not waste it. I let him in. We sat on the edge of my bed like teenagers, knees not touching, mugs warm between our hands. He asked how the visit had gone. I told him the truth before I had time to dress it up. Strange. Empty. Like trying on a coat that used to fit and feeling the seams pull in the wrong places. He listened, his eyes steady on my face. He said he recognized that feeling. He said he had spent years in a marriage where he and his wife rotated around the same center out of habit, not love. He said he had learned late that compatibility is not the same as connection. The room felt very small. He set his mug down on the floor and took a breath like someone about to dive. He said he knew he should not say what he was about to say. He said he knew the power dynamics, the ethics, the optics. He said he was tired of living like a ghost in his own skin. He told me he was drawn to me. That he had been for a long time. He said it quietly. Without drama. Without expectation. Then he said he would leave my room and pretend he had never said anything if that was what I wanted. I could have told him yes. I could have drawn a line and walked him to the door and gone to sleep and called Noah and told him I needed more and tried to rebuild something that had already burned down without us noticing. I did not. I did not tell him to leave. I asked him how long. The corners of his mouth flexed, like he wanted to smile and knew he should not. He said since the first semester he watched me teach and realized my students came alive in ways they did not in his classes anymore. He said since the afternoon he had seen me sitting by the library window, reading a story aloud to myself under my breath, marking it up with a red pen and laughing at the good parts. He said since the night he had heard me crying in my office with the door closed and walked away instead of knocking. He said a lot of things. My heart hurt. My body hummed. I told myself I was only listening. That I was allowed to hear someone want me without doing anything about it. He moved closer on the bed. Our knees touched. His hand hovered near mine. He told me that he would not kiss me without me asking. Those exact words. He knew how to make consent sound like seduction. I sat there with my heart beating too fast, with my marriage a city away, with the ocean pounding against the cliffs. I did not say no. I did not say leave. I said, very quietly, please. He kissed me. If I tell you that it felt like being seen after years of being looked past, I risk making this sound like some tragic romance with justified cheating. It was not justified. It was not romantic. It was electric. Wrong. Hungry. I kissed him back. That was the moment I betrayed Noah in the way that counts. Not in the sense of technical infidelity. In the sense of choosing my desire over the promises I had made. We did not sleep together that night. We stopped at kissing, both of us shaking when we pulled apart, both of us breathing like we had run uphill. He left my room with his hair mussed and his mouth swollen and told me he was giving me one night to decide if this was something I wanted or a moment we would fold into a drawer and never open again. I did not sleep. The next morning, I watched him in workshop, his face composed, his questions sharp. Eva almost vibrated with eagerness when he praised a line she had written. I felt something ugly twist in my chest, a possessive flicker that embarrassed me. Jealousy shows you parts of yourself you would rather not see. By evening, I had decided. Or maybe the decision had been made the moment my mouth touched his. We began an affair. You want details, I know. I will not give you the kind of details that turn this into something else. There were kisses in empty hallways. Hands brushing in the kitchen while residents slept. Nights when we met in the small sitting room at the back of the house, the one with the door that did not quite close all the way, and curled up on the couch like conspirators, speaking in whispers. There was one night when we did cross that final line, when the air in my room felt too thick and his hands on my shoulders became something that broke open the last of my resistance. I will tell you only this, I felt both more alive and more ashamed afterward than I had in years. We told ourselves it was temporary. Summer heat. Residency bubble. We told ourselves that when August came and the house emptied and the lights were taken down, we would fold it up and go back to being colleagues. We told ourselves a lot of things. Eva watched him with such intensity that it made me uncomfortable. She lingered after workshops, laughed too loudly at his jokes, brought him coffee in the mornings. She began dressing differently. Little changes. Lipstick one shade deeper. Shirts that showed the thin line of her collarbones. She confessed to me one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the library room while we sorted through donated books. She told me she had never met anyone who made her feel the way he did. She told me she knew it was pathetic to have a crush on a professor. She told me part of her believed he understood her in ways no one her age ever could. She did not say I think I am in love with him. She did not need to. I felt like I had been punched. Because I knew what it was to be that age and attach your entire sense of worth to whether a powerful man saw you. I also knew what it was to be on the other side now, to have that attention and to use it. It was the first time I saw myself clearly as the villain in someone else's story. I told her gently that it would pass. That intense artistic mentorship often feels like something more. That he cared about her work, not her body. I lied to her with the kind of ease that still makes me flinch. The night before the residency ended, we held a final reading. The residents sat around the room with their pages, voices quivering, laughing, crying as they read. The air was thick with emotion and too much cheap wine. Thomas and I sat at the back, listening. Eva read last. Her piece was a short story. It was about a young woman in a writing program by the sea. It was about a professor who paid her too much attention. It was about the professor having an affair with another faculty member while the girl watched, invisible. The details were different, but the bones were the same. My skin went cold as she read. I glanced at Thomas. He looked very, very still. When she finished, the room clapped. She took a small, shaky bow. People told her it was brave. Raw. Honest. I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly what she had done. Later, after everyone went to bed, I found her sitting on the steps outside, knees tucked to her chest, staring at the dark. She told me she knew. She told me she was not stupid. She told me when she walked down the hall the previous night, the door to the sitting room had been cracked open just enough for her to see my head on his shoulder, his hand in my hair. She told me she had felt something inside her snap. Not jealousy. Disillusionment. I tried to apologize. She told me not to. She said the thing that cut deepest. She said she had always promised herself she would not become a woman whose life revolved around men. Then she said she was not sure who she had become instead. The next morning, she left early. She did not hug either of us goodbye. The house emptied. Thomas and I stayed behind another 2 days to close up. We washed sheets and stacked chairs and turned off lights. We did not touch each other. We did not speak about what had happened with Eva. On the last afternoon, we stood in the kitchen, surrounded by packed boxes. He told me that he did not regret a moment of the summer. He told me he knew that did not make him good. He told me he wanted to find a way to be in my life that was less covert. He floated a ridiculous idea about us being honest with our partners, about messy separations and new configurations, about two people building something real out of the wreckage of their old lives. He said it like a possibility, not a plan. I told him I needed time. He said he would give it. Fall semester started. The residency became a memory we pretended was only professional. We still worked together. Still sat in meetings. Still shared the occasional laugh over an especially pretentious student sentence. We did not touch. We did not kiss. We did not sleep together again. But that distance was not clean. It was sharp and aching. There were days I almost called Noah to confess everything. There were days I almost called Thomas and told him to come over. Instead, I did nothing. Which is, in its own way, a choice. Then the manuscript arrived. A link in my inbox from the department coordinator. Early pages from Thomas' new novel. Lucky us, we were the chosen few to see it before the world. Half an hour after that came an email from Noah. Subject line simple. Have you seen this? No greeting. Just the link pasted below. I clicked it from home first, sitting at our kitchen table with my heart already thudding. I read the opening pages online. Felt my breath catch as I recognized the house, the residency, the shape of a woman like me and a man like him on the page. Then I printed it and took it to the library because I needed to be somewhere that wasn't ours, somewhere I could fall apart in public and still call it reading. Which brings us back to that gray afternoon, the shaking hands, the sick feeling. As I read, it became clear this was not just inspired by that summer. It was that summer. Thinly veiled. Scenes we had shared were rearranged, refined, made more palatable. Our ugliest confessions turned into lyrical monologues. The worst of my doubts recast as noble conflict. Eva's story twisted into a subplot that made her seem unstable, obsessive, rather than deeply and justifiably hurt. In his version, the older man was tormented but ultimately brave, willing to sacrifice his comfort to pursue something real. In his version, the younger woman was a little lost but saved by his belief in her. In his version, the partners at home were blurry, half-formed, easy to leave behind. In the margins, I began to scribble notes. Anger first. You did not ask permission. Then clarity. You are still using us. Then the deepest cut. You were writing this while you were with me. I thought of all those nights at the big table, our notebooks open, him telling me he was stuck on a project. I thought of the way he sometimes went quiet after something I said, his eyes going distant. He had not been going still because he was moved. He had been going still because he was harvesting. Turning our private moments into material. Noah had read it first. That detail sat huge and heavy in my mind. I called him as soon as I left the library, walking too fast down the hill, the wind cold on my face. He answered on the second ring. He said he had wondered how long it would take me. His voice was very calm. I asked him when he had seen it. He told me Thomas had sent him a draft weeks ago, asking for a blurb. Said he valued Noah's analytical mind, that he wanted a scientist's perspective on the emotional physics of the story. Noah said he had started reading and felt his stomach drop somewhere around chapter 5. He recognized me. He recognized our house. He recognized details he knew I would never have shared with anyone but him and the one other person I had clearly shared more with than I should have. He told me he kept reading, even though it hurt, because he needed to be sure. I stood on the sidewalk, cars rushing by, listening to my husband tell me in the calmest voice I had ever heard that he had watched my infidelity unfold as fiction before he heard it as confession. I did not try to deny it. There was nothing left to deny. I told him I had cheated. I told him I had fallen into something I knew was wrong. I told him I had done it because I felt invisible, because I was lonely, because someone made me feel like I mattered in a way I had not felt in a long time. I told him none of those were excuses. He listened. Then he said something that stunned me. He said he had been unfaithful too. Not physically. Emotionally. He said he had been married to the lab more than to me for the last 2 years. That he had hidden behind work instead of talking to me. That he had let distance grow and told himself it was temporary. That he had not cheated with a person, but he had cheated with his own comfort. He said he was not equating the two. He said he was just telling the whole truth. I started to cry then, ugly and hiccuping, walking down a quiet side street so students would not see their professor falling apart. I asked if he hated me. He said he did not. He said he was hurt. Devastated. Angry in flashes. But he did not hate me. He said what he hated was seeing our story flattened on a page by someone who had always believed he owned narratives. He asked if I wanted to try to rebuild. I told him I did not know. It was the only honest answer. We decided on something that sounded like a compromise and felt like hovering on a cliff edge. We would separate. Temporarily on paper. Permanently in space. He would stay in his city. I would stay in mine. We would go to therapy separately. Maybe together eventually. We would not make any legal moves until a year had passed. It felt like both a reprieve and a sentence. After I hung up, I went to Thomas' office. He looked up when I walked in, eyes brightening, mouth already forming my name. When he saw my expression, his smile fell. He asked if I had read it. I said yes. He asked what I thought. I asked him if he had any idea how arrogant it was to make my worst mistake into his next book. He said he had changed details. He said he had protected identities. He said he had written it because he needed to make sense of what had happened, because that is what writers do, they turn pain into story. He said a lot of things about art and truth and the flimsy border between life and fiction. I asked him if he had considered asking my consent. He said he had, and he had decided he could not, because he had known I would say no. He said he had a responsibility to the work. I stood there looking at this man I had once admired, once desired, once let into my bed, and I felt a cold clarity settle over me. He had never truly seen me as a person. I was a character. A source. A plot line. He had framed his betrayal as some noble sacrifice to literature. Mine, on the other hand, would end up looking like what it was labeled in his pages. A weakness. In the end, the real twist of my summer was not that I cheated on my husband with my boss. It was that my boss cheated on me with my story. I did the only thing left that felt like reclaiming something. I resigned. From the Residency Oversight Committee. From the department. From Shoreline. From proximity to him and his narratives. It was messy. People were shocked. Some were supportive. Some whispered. I took a job at a community arts center in a town inland, smaller, less picturesque, more real. I ran workshops at folding tables for teenagers who did not care about publication credits, only about finding sentences that made them feel less alone. Noah and I talked once a week. Sometimes more. Sometimes less. Sometimes warmly. Sometimes with long stretches of silence. We are still separated. We are still married. We are still deciding. I heard through colleagues that Thomas's book is scheduled for release next spring. It has a new title now. The main character's hair is a different color. The residency is in a converted farmhouse instead of a coastal estate. He changed enough to satisfy legal. Not enough to satisfy me. I will not read the final version. My story is not in there. Not the real one. The real one is this. A woman who was so used to living in other people's narratives, teaching other people's stories, propping up other people's arcs, that when someone finally centered her, even falsely, she mistook it for love. A woman who betrayed the person who had always been willing to be quiet background so she could be foreground. A woman who then discovered her own betrayal had been co-opted and reframed by the man she had almost chosen instead. If you were here with me on this sofa right now, knees touching, listening to me say all of this out loud, I would admit the part that still feels most shameful. More than the sex. More than the lies. It is this. For a few brilliant, awful months, I liked the way I sounded when he said my name. I let that be enough. I think sometimes the worst cheating we do is not against partners. It is against ourselves. Against the versions of us that deserved better, the ones who would have walked away sooner if we had trusted them. I am trying now to build a life where my name in someone else's mouth is not the loudest thing I hear. Where the loudest thing is my own voice, telling my own story, in my own words, not flattened into someone else's chapter. That is my confession. Not that I fell for my boss in a house by the sea. But that I let him convince me my story was safer in his hands than in mine. Never again. Now when I stand in front of my students, or sit across from a friend like you and say here is how you write about betrayal, I start with one sentence. Write yourself as the main character. And do not let anyone else edit you out.